Hi, I am Sherlock. Welcome to my new mystery case.
It was on one of those sullen afternoons when the London air hangs like wetted felt upon the lungs that Inspector Lestrade burst in upon our quiet with a vigour which shook the dust from the Persian rug. Holmes, who had been stretched like a languid greyhound upon the settee, opened one eye and allowed the other to follow at its leisure. I had been engaged upon an article in the Lancet, though I confess the grotesque outline of a violin case on the mantelpiece had drawn my thoughts toward music rather than medicine. For Holmes's melancholy of the morning had promised us either a Bach fugue or, if Providence were kindly disposed, a case. Providence elected the latter, though it came in the shape of Lestrade's hat, battered and rain-speckled, held to his breast like a banner rescued from rout. "You are wanted, Mr. Holmes," he cried, not waiting to be offered a chair. "Wanted badly. A gentleman of consequence has been found dead upon a stair, an accursed spiral of iron that corkscrews up the heart of the house. It looks a fall. It looks murder. It looks the very devil." Holmes sat up, steepling his fingers. "The three are often synonymous, Lestrade. Pray compose yourself. You have come directly from the scene." Lestrade blinked. "Directly from Bellwether House, Bloomsbury? How the mischief—" "Your boot leather is shaved at the instep by narrow iron treads. The left boot shows a crescent smear of blacking taken from a step where the paint is worn and the iron bleeds through, and your coat still knows the intimate embrace of damp stone. Note the diagonal sheen upon the sleeve. Mrs. Hudson, a dash of the strong tea, if you please. Is the body yet removed?" "Dr. Moylan waits below with the corpse," said Lestrade, "but the master of the house begged for you by name. Sir Julius Bellwether, one of your old admirers from that business of the Piccadilly forgeries." Holmes's nostrils dilated slightly. "Ah, Bellwether, whose silver was too often purchased by the credulity of others. And the deceased?" "A Mr. Ezra Larch," said Lestrade, consulting his notebook. "Antiquarian by trade, dealer in curious objects, a frequent guest. He lies at the foot of the spiral stair with his neck broken. As tidy as you please." Holmes rose. "Tidy necks and iron stairs seldom consort by chance. Watson, your hat? Lestrade, you may yet have your murder, though whether it is the devil's doing or merely a man's vanity in a better coat remains to be seen." Bellwether House stood in a crescent whose soot-blackened facades leaned inward like conspirators. The rain had abated, leaving the street glossy and the gas lamps blurred by a film of damp. Within, a chill, bookish odour pervaded the hall, as if vellum and ink had their own weather. The butler, a spare, quivering reed of a man called Smethwick, conducted us to a central well where the house rose around a spiral stair of wrought iron that climbed like a black vine through 4 stories of air. The steps were narrow and delicately pierced. Each tread bore at its outer edge a little curl of metal, more ornament than aid, which might have snagged the unwary heel. Along the inner side ran a handrail smooth with age and much handling, yet newly smudged in places with what looked to be grease. At the base of the stair lay Mr. Ezra Larch. He was a man of 55 or thereabouts, his clean-shaven face sharp in feature, the nose thin and rather long, the mouth small and prim, as if all his life he had been buttoning it against foolish expenditure. The head was twisted upon the neck at an angle which admitted of no doubt. His hands had fallen open, palms up, with a curious, almost pleading relaxation. A hat, the high-crowned type favoured by men whose trades leaned toward the clerical, had rolled a little way and come to rest against the newel. Dr. Moylan, a florid Irishman in a sealskin collar, bowed shortly to Holmes and muttered his preliminary opinion of a fall and instant death. Holmes did not regard the body at once. He circled the well and climbed 2 steps, then 3, then descended again, his eye moving with that soft, devouring motion which I have likened elsewhere to the sweep of a hawk. He paused at the 9th step, stooped, and with the edge of his nail lifted a pinhead of something from the iron, transferring it, by that sleight so peculiarly his own, to a slip of white card he produced from his pocket-book. He sniffed. His eyes brightened. "Interesting," he murmured, and went on to the 13th step, where he bent to study a mark upon the riser, a small crescent scuff, darker than the rest. From his pocket he drew the lens and held it a hair's breadth from the iron. "More interesting still. Watson, your view?" "No, not yet. Let us not spoil the pleasure of the child by showing him the toy before it is wound." Sir Julius Bellwether appeared upon the 1st-floor landing, a gentleman in whom a sort of prosperous fragility contended with genuine trouble. His hair, of that silvery hue which seems powdered even when untouched, stood up in uneven distress, and he clutched the balustrade with a tremulous hand. "My house is profaned, Mr. Holmes," he said, his voice thin. "Mr. Larch came this afternoon upon an appointment, 3 o'clock, to advise me regarding a medieval missal. We ascended together to my library. He left me after tea, saying he wished to look once more upon the binding of a Venetian ledger in the little cabinet room below. I returned to my desk. 20 minutes later, Smethwick cried out from the hall, and we found Mr. Larch, as you see him." "No one else passed upon the stair?" said Holmes. Sir Julius shook his head. "I heard no step. But then the rain began to drum. It may have masked a sound." Holmes's gaze had come to rest upon the dead man's left cuff. He knelt, touched it with a gloved finger, and showed me, with the quiet pride of a conjurer, revealing an unexpected animal, a drawn thread of vivid red, as fine as a hair. "You do not patronize a navy tailor and wear scarlet thread, Watson," he murmured, "unless some part of your attire is not your own." Lestrade sniffed. "Threads are threads, Mr. Holmes. The question is, did he fall, or was he thrown?" "That is emphatically not the question," said Holmes, smiling. "The question is where, Inspector? And then how? And then, since we live in a civilized country, who?" He leaned over the corpse, and, with the back of his knuckle, lifted a lock of Mr. Larch's hair. A pallid dust lay upon the forehead, too fine for plaster, too dry for rain, more like the bloom that settles upon old paper. On the right hand, the forefinger showed a faint, dark smear at the tip, as though it had touched oil. Holmes sniffed the air once more and turned his head slightly as a hound might when the breeze shifts. "Carbolic," he said, "but not from the doctor's bag. The trace is stale. There is also the ghost of something more oriental. Do you mark it, Watson?" I did. A sweet, thin smoke, hardly more than a memory upon the air. "Egyptian cigarette," I offered, emboldened. "Or the paper of one, rather than the leaf," Holmes returned. "Good. We are on the first rung." Smethwick, summoned by a bell-pull, gave his account in that quavering monotone of the trained servant. Mr. Larch had arrived punctually, removing his gloves and placing them within his hat, as if with a ritual exactness. He had carried, besides, a small leather case with brass corners. After tea he descended alone, the house being quiet, Sir Julius's niece, Miss Eliza, being abroad at her music, and the housemaid in the scullery. Smethwick had gone to the hall to see about a draught, and had turned only when he heard, here the man shuddered. "A sort of soft clatter, sir, as of something that had no right to move making a try at it." There had been no shout. Only the clatter and then the stillness which, in a house, is worse than noise. Holmes asked for the leather case. It was brought from the little cabinet room at the foot of the stair, a snug space with 2 book presses and a narrow window whose glass was starred by old flaws. On the small table lay a Venetian account book bound in green morocco, the corners rubbed to biscuit. Holmes opened the case with a gentle hand. Within lay 3 objects: a narrow magnifier of the kind used by engravers, a tiny phial stoppered with 2 drops of some dark substance congealed at the rim, and a square of paper ruled faintly with blue lines, across which ran a neat column of figures and a single word in a tidy Italian hand: Campanile. Holmes's eyes flickered. He held the phial against the light and turned it, then replaced it. You will note, Lestrade, that Mr. Larch prepared to examine very small things, to annotate very precisely, and to carry with him a liquid not native to teacups. He also wrote Campanile, a bell tower, a word which belongs in Venice as comfortably as this ledger does. Sir Julius, who smokes Egyptian cigarettes in your house. Sir Julius coloured. I do not, Mr. Holmes. Nor does Smethwick. Miss Eliza is no smoker. Mr. Larch, I believe, abhorred the habit for the stain it leaves upon vellum. Then someone did not consider the vellum, said Holmes softly. He climbed again, this time with a cat's economy of motion, pausing at the 9th and 13th steps, precisely as before. On the landing, he knelt to peer beneath the tread, then reached between the scrollwork and drew forth, with a pair of tweezers, a triangular chip no larger than a fingernail, pale and waxy, with a bright red fleck embedded within. Sealing wax, he said, and placed it beside the earlier speck upon his white card. Scarlet. Not common in private correspondence, too theatrical, but fashionable upon invitations and certain legal notices. Lestrade's impatience flared. Wax, threads, smells. We have a dead man, Mr. Holmes, whose death has been arranged with a practised hand. Holmes returned, the steels slipping under the velvet. Observe, the dust upon the upper flights lies virginal. No foot has bruised it since morning. Yet our man lies below with a broken neck, and the marks upon the 13th step show a pressure of heel from a right shoe that turns inward, an old deformity, while the scuff upon the riser at 9 is from a left shoe, broader, heavier, and recently chalked. 2 men did not ascend. 1 man descended in another man's shoes. Or... He paused, and the thin smile returned. A cleverer thing? What thing? I asked, for my patience, though not so brief as Lestrade's, had its limits. Holmes' gaze rested for the first time full upon the body. The kind of thing that requires a hand to grease a rail, a drop to numb a nerve, a note to tempt a scholar to stoop, and a spiral whose treachery is not in its height, but its curve. We are, I think, at the beginning of a very pretty staircase, Watson. Let us see whether we climb it or it climbs us. Holmes's glance moved from the phial to the ledger and back again with that air of suspended judgment which in him meant a mind already far in advance. He drew a chair from the little cabinet room and set it square to the stair's base, then, kneeling, measured with his eye the fall of a man of Larch's height. He took my cane without a word and laid it along the lower 3 treads to mark a line. Then he rose, and taking the handrail in his palm, slid his glove across it, holding it afterward to the light so that a faint, viscous glisten showed upon the kid. Not tallow, he murmured, and not machine oil. A kitchen origin, I think. The curve of the rail would carry the hand inward and down at the 3rd step. Note the shine there, Watson, if the palm were already committed. A very pretty piece of physics, set to the key of cruelty. Lestrade shifted. He slipped, then. You have it your own way. Holmes' lids drooped. A slip requires a step in motion. Did Mr. Larch descend in motion of his own will? You will observe the right forefinger, the smear of oil upon the pad. He tested the rail before the accident, or steadied himself after some interruption. Either way, the hand came to grief where it should have helped. We must see whether the grief was prepared. He stooped once more to the 13th tread, and with his lens traced the scuff I had first seen him mark. A heel, inward turned. Our deceased carries no such deformity. His boot is straight-lasted, and the crescent upon the 9th riser, broad, chalked, does not repeat upon any other step. One footprint cannot make a descent. We are missing a sequence, Inspector Sir Julius, who had been listening with the air of a man enchanted and repelled by equal parts, clasped his trembling hands. "Mr. Holmes, if there is anything within my power—" "There is everything within it," said Holmes kindly. "First, lock your house to all but those already present. Second, if Miss Eliza returns, pray inform me at once. Third, suffer me to examine your study, and Smethwick, I shall trouble you for a tour of your kitchen." The kitchen proved a narrow, ship-shaped cell at the rear, polished to a devotional shine. A copper stewpan stood inverted upon a cloth to drain, beside it a jar of goose-fat, opaque and clean, and, on a wooden board, a shallow dish with a smear of something darker, more tenacious. Holmes touched it with the tip of a match and lifted his brows. "Rendered beef dripping but adulterated," he said. "Note the odour, flat soapy. Carbolic has visited this dish, Smethwick blanched. I scrubbed, sir, as I always do. The stairs, too, of a morning." "Just so," said Holmes. "And who, besides you, has lately attended to the stair rail?" "No one, sir." "That is to say, Miss Eliza is delicate with her hands and will touch nothing that smirches. Sir Julius has not climbed to the roof since May. And the maids—" Holmes's smile was a thin cut. "The maids, like good soldiers, obey the line of march you set them. This dish, Smethwick, when was it last in use?" "Not since yesterday," the man stammered. "We had chops. The dripping is kept on this shelf, and the jar sits beside a bottle of washing carbolic." Holmes indicated both with a lazy finger. Human nature. A damp cloth, a spoon to stir, a bottle knocked, a drop astray. Not your doing. To design a death, my good man, but sufficient for a designer to use. Remain at hand. We returned to Sir Julius's study, a handsome room full of decent leather and indecent quantities of paper. A writing table near the window bore a heavy blotter, a sand shaker, and a rack of envelopes. In the grate a little ash had fallen into a cone and kept its shape. Holmes glanced once and made for the mantel, where a single stick of scarlet sealing wax lay truncated, its end paring fresh. He touched it to the card upon which he had placed the triangular chip. The flecked red matched to a shade. "Your correspondence, Sir Julius?" he asked. "My solicitor's clerk brought a packet not 3 days gone," Sir Julius replied, pale. "Some shares regrettably diminished, and an opinion in Chancery. We opened and resealed an enclosure to forward to my man in Venice. The enclosure used this wax," said Holmes, "and the chip found beneath the landing belongs to the same stick." "Who resealed it?" Sir Julius's mouth worked. "Mr. Larch advised me in such matters. He was fastidious about handling indeed." Holmes turned the Venetian ledger between his fingers, testing the hinges. "And this volume, what interest had he in it?" Sir Julius pointed with a shaking finger to a place 3/4 through, where a parchment tab had been glued. Holmes slid the book open. A folded sheet, more modern than its fellow leaves, had been tucked like a shy guest among the pages. Upon it was the ghost of a plan in pencil, a square tower with a stair whirled up its inside, and lines, light, exact, measuring angles, as if a draftsman had coaxed mathematics from air. Across the margin ran 2 notations, 9 with a cross beside it, 13 circled with an arrow downward. Holmes looked at me over the sheet, and in that glance there was a private acknowledgment, almost a reprimand for not seeing it sooner. "Our campanile," he said. "Mr. Larch was drawing from memory a spiral, perhaps not this one, but spiral enough for the numbers to coincide. The marks upon our 9th and 13th steps are not errant, they are chosen." "Chosen by whom?" Lestrade demanded. "By the man who rehearsed an accident," Holmes returned. "A spiral betrays in 2 ways, a slip magnified by rotation, and the habit of the hand to reach for a rail where the body's weight is worst disposed, to prepare the rail with a film that betrays rather than saves, and to mark for oneself the steps where the force is greatest. That is the work of patience. He practiced here. Practiced?" Lestrade's incredulity was wholesome. "And no one saw?" Holmes tapped the ash cone in the grate, and it fell, revealing beneath it a smudge of grey like moth's wing. He pinched a little and smelt it. Paper burned at leisure, a cigarette consumed with care. Egyptian. The person who rehearsed had the run of your house, Sir Julius, and the leisure to smoke, to measure, to hide a chip of wax, to smooth the rail, and to go unremarked. That speaks not of intruders." Sir Julius looked stricken. "You cannot mean Smethwick has been with me 20 years? "Then set him aside," said Holmes gently. "Who else is as free here as he?" A light step sounded in the hall, and a murmur of voices. Smethwick appeared at the threshold as if conjured by his name. "Miss Eliza is returned, sir. Shall I show the young lady in?" Holmes's face became for an instant extremely still. "If you please." Miss Eliza Bellwether entered with the air of a creature more at home in a conservatory than a house, pale, precise, and faintly perfumed with violets. She had that fashionable slenderness which reduces the human form to angles and emaciates the smile. In her gloved hand she held a roll of music bound with a crimson cord, whose end was whip-stitched in a bright thread. I could not but notice that the thread's colour was of that same vivid scarlet Holmes had lifted from the dead man's cuff. She curtsied to her uncle and to us, then, before anyone could rehearse the horrors, she spoke with that curious mixture of candour and calculation which belongs to certain young ladies. "I met Mr. Larch upon the landing, uncle, on my way out," she said. "I suppose I am to be questioned." "Yes, I heard the frightful noise upon returning. Smethwick's cry was abominable, and I went at once to my room, for I am not constituted for spectacles. I have had my lesson with Maestro Torrigiani at 3. He smokes abominably, and is too free with his hands. I shall send him away, uncle, if you allow it." Holmes bowed slightly. "Your maestro is Italian." "Venetian," she said, and her mouth formed the word as if it tasted of sugar. "He is in raptures about uncle's ledger. He says the binding is not Venetian at all, but English work in mimicry, and that the end papers hide a wove laid down later. I told him he must say so to Mr. Larch, who knows everything." Holmes' gaze flicked to the crimson cord upon her music. "You are industrious with a needle, Miss Bellwether." She tilted her head. "I mend my own gloves. It is the fashion to show neatness. And your maestro's cigarettes, do you carry their scent?" She laughed, a small, bell-like sound without warmth. "I detest the reek. If it clings, it is not by invitation." Holmes, with that tactile politeness which disarms, gestured toward the ledger. "Would you oblige me by naming this word for our benefit?" He showed her the slip upon which Campanile was written in the neat Italian hand. Her lashes dipped. "It is a bell tower, Mr. Holmes." "And your maestro's own hand resembles this?" She paused a fraction too long. "He writes with a flourish." "This is small bookman's script, "Quite so," said Holmes, and let the paper fall upon the desk as if it signified nothing. "One more indulgence, Miss Bellwether. Did you ever watch a man descend this stair from above?" She looked away toward the well, at the black vine of iron coiling upward, and a faint shiver took her. "I watched no one descend. I hate the spiral. It makes one dizzy." Holmes's eyes had taken on that brightness, which is not light, but heat. He moved to the doorway and, as if the matter were banal, said, "Lestrade, you will see the body removed now, but with care. Dr. Moylan, be so good as to keep the neck intact for the post-mortem. I shall wish to see the hyoid. Smethwick, have any of your steps been chalked of late for repair?" "Only where the Iron Man came last month," Smethwick answered, startled. "2 treads were fixed, there and there." He pointed upward precisely to the regions of Holmes's earlier interest. "Thank you," said Holmes. "Watson, you and I will pay a call on Maestro Torrigiani this evening. I have a fancy for Italian cigarettes. Before we go, however, one last thing." He stepped back into the cabinet room and, with the delicacy of a watchmaker, turned the Venetian ledger leaf by leaf, stopping at the place where the modern plan lay hid. From its fold he teased a grain of something pale as fish scale. Laid upon the card beside the red wax fleck and the oil speck, it showed under the lens a faint striation, as if it had been drawn across iron. Holmes smiled without mirth. "Gut," he said softly. "Catgut, fine as hair, a string tight enough to sing if plucked, and cruel enough to snare a heel at the inward curve. We are in the presence of someone who thinks in lines and tension, Watson, someone who plays both with music and with gravity. I have heard their note. It remains to see upon whom they meant it to fall." Holmes had hardly replaced the pale sliver of catgut into his pocketbook when Lestrade, with a muttered oath about musical contraptions and foreign scribbles, gave orders for the body to be removed. I confess I could not blame him. The sight of Ezra Larch twisted unnaturally upon the flags had cast a chill even upon my own professional nerves. Yet Holmes, with that singular capacity of his to set aside the horror in favour of the problem, seemed enlivened by the removal, as though the absence of death cleared the stage for reason to play its part. "Watson," he said, drawing me aside to the stairwell, "observe how a spiral is unlike a straight flight. Each step is not only higher or lower than its neighbour, but turned from it. A man who falls here is not merely descending, he is whirled. Now imagine a filament stretched taut across 2 of these steps, invisible in dim light, and the foot which meets it drawn inward by the curve. Add a hand upon a greased rail and you have not mischance, but orchestration. I pictured it and shuddered. Then Larch was doomed the instant he set his weight upon that part of the stair." "Unless he saw the trap," Holmes said, his lips tightening. "And note, he did see something." His forefinger bore the trace of oil. He suspected tampering, touched the rail, and yet he descended. Why? Either he was compelled, or he was lured into carelessness. Both possibilities point away from accident and toward an active mind behind this theatre. Sir Julius, who lingered near with a tortured anxiety, overheard. "But who, Mr. Holmes? Who would contrive such villainy under my roof? I am an old man. I have enemies only of commerce. Mr. Larch was no more than a dealer. What profit lies in his death?" Holmes's reply was quiet. "Profit, Sir Julius, comes in many forms, some counted in gold, others in silence. Tell me, who knew of Larch's appointment today?" "Only myself, Smethwick, and—" Sir Julius hesitated, glancing toward the drawing-room, where his niece's voice still drifted faintly as she hummed a phrase from her music lesson. Eliza, perhaps, for I mentioned it this morning. Holmes's eyes half closed. And the Maestro Torrigiani? Sir Julius wrung his hands. He is a musician, nothing more. A hanger-on of fashion, extravagant, insufferably vain. He flatters my niece's talent, though whether he improves it I cannot say. Holmes's thin smile did not encourage. Then we shall make his acquaintance. Watson, your revolver, if you please. The evening may prove more dramatic than the overture promises. We left Bellwether House under a sky turning purple with dusk, the lamps winking out one by one in the street as the fog crept back like a patient thief. A hansom carried us eastward through the clamorous arteries of the city. Holmes remained silent, but his fingers drummed lightly upon his knee, as they always did when thought chased thought at a gallop. At last he spoke. The maestro smokes Egyptian cigarettes, that much is plain. The scent in Bellwether's cabinet, faint as it was, had lingered long enough to defy a morning's draught. Larch, for all his fussy habits, would never have tolerated such a practice in the presence of vellum. And then there is the plan, the spiral, the notations. An Italian hand, though Eliza protested it was too neat for her teacher. My dear Watson, she has unwittingly betrayed him. A musician accustomed to copying scores develops just such a regularity. We must see how far his performance extends beyond music. We reached a lodging-house in Bloomsbury, a tall, grim edifice where the lower windows glowed with lamplight. A sign above the door, Lessons in Piano and Voice, bore the maestro's name in florid italics. Holmes bade me hang back as he ascended the narrow stair and rapped smartly. The door opened upon a man of middle years, compact of frame, with dark, curling hair, and a mustachio waxed to points. His waistcoat was of velvet, his fingers adorned with rings, and his eyes, the eyes of one who values mirrors more than men, glittered with suspicion. "Signor Torrigiani?" Holmes inquired, bowing with a courtesy that belied the steel in his voice. "Si, signore. And who has the honour?" "My name is Holmes. This is my colleague, Dr. Watson. We are inquiring into the sad misfortune at Bellwether House." At once the maestro's expression arranged itself into a mask of horror, a hand fluttering to his breast. "Terribile!" The poor antiquario, so learned, so exact. I had seen him but yesterday. To fall like that, ah, Dio mio! Holmes' gaze did not waver. "You admired his exactitude, yet you quarrelled over the ledger, did you not? You pronounced its binding false, its papers adulterated. That is a bold assertion against a man of Larch's standing." The Italian spread his hands. "I said what I thought." "Is it a crime to hold an opinion?" Holmes stepped into the lamplight of the studio. The room was littered with scores, instruments, and a half-smoked cigarette upon a dish. He lifted it, sniffed, and replaced it with a delicate gesture. No crime, yet the hand that penned Campanile in the margin of Sir Julius's volume bears remarkable resemblance to your own. For the briefest instant, Torrigiani's eyes flickered. He recovered at once, smiling with too many teeth. "You flatter me. My script is much more, how do you say, ornamental." Holmes leaned forward, his voice dropping to a silk thread. "And did your ornaments include stretching a filament across an English staircase?" Catgut is a familiar material to a musician. The maestro's smile cracked. He laughed too loudly. "Ridiculous! What should I gain from the death of this man Larch?" "Perhaps the silencing of a rival opinion," Holmes said coldly. "Or perhaps something of greater value hidden within the ledger." "You examined it with interest, did you not?" Torrigiani's hands trembled. He grasped at his cigarette case and lit another with exaggerated calm. "I have nothing to hide, signore. If you doubt me, search my room. Holmes' eyes gleamed. We may yet take you at your word, but not tonight. Good evening, maestro. He turned on his heel, leaving the Italian to splutter behind us. Outside, in the damp air, I could not restrain myself. Holmes, the man is plainly guilty. His evasion, his agitation, it was writ upon his very brow. Why not demand a search at once? Holmes hailed a cab before replying. Because, my dear fellow, guilt and fear are not synonyms. He fears discovery, yes, but discovery of what? If he contrived Larch's death, he is reckless to invite us to search. More likely, he is entangled in some smaller deceit, one that sits uneasily beside a greater crime. No, we must watch him. His vanity will undo him faster than our questions. The cab bore us back toward Baker Street, the mist thickening into tendrils that licked at the lamps. Holmes sat absorbed, every line of his face sharpened by thought. When at last we arrived, he strode at once to the chemical table, where he set down the phial taken from Larch's case. With practised hands, he unstopped it and let fall a single dark bead into a dish of water. The droplet spread, tinging the surface with an iridescent stain. Watson, you see? Opium extract, thick, resinous, and adulterated with something acrid. A drug to dull the nerves, perhaps to render a man less steady upon his feet. Why should an antiquarian carry such a thing? And why hidden in his case? I shook my head, baffled. Perhaps he's suffered some ailment? Or perhaps, Holmes said grimly, it was meant for another. We are dealing with a conspiracy whose threads are wound tighter than the spiral of Bellwether's stair. A Venetian ledger, an Italian musician, a young lady whose scarlet thread adorns a dead man's cuff. Each strand is innocent alone, yet together they bind a pattern. He sat back, lighting his pipe, the smoke wreathing about his head like a crown of thought. Tomorrow, Watson, we shall return to Bellwether House. There is more to be learned from Miss Eliza and from the ledger, which has become the axis of this affair. Mark me well, Larch's death was but the first step. The stair climbs higher yet, and I intend to reach its summit. Morning found Baker Street washed clean by a light rain that silvered the chimney pots and made a mirror of the pavements. Holmes had slept little, if at all. I discovered him before breakfast with the lens to his eye, comparing the fleck of scarlet wax to a crumb he had taken from his violin case, an experiment which, when it yielded nothing, he abandoned with a shrug of impatience and a brief excursion upon the strings that set the air vibrating with a phrase from a Corelli sonata. At 9, a note arrived from Lestrade to say that the body of Mr. Larch had been conveyed to the mortuary and that he proposed a post-mortem at noon. Holmes sent back a card requesting the hyoid be preserved entire and that the right hand be closely examined for any abrasion foreign to a mere fall. Then, with a hatchet bread roll devoured in 3 wolfish bites and a coffee scarcely tasted, he declared us ready for Bellwether House. We found Sir Julius in a state verging upon collapse. The old gentleman had the look of a man who has sat up to stare down his own staircase, only to see the stair gaze back unblinking. He greeted us in the hall with the wan gratitude of the beleaguered. "Mr. Holmes, Doctor, some new outrage has been attempted. In the night, my study was rifled. The Venetian ledger is gone." Holmes's face held neither surprise nor reproach. It sharpened, if anything, to a more relentless clarity. "Forced entry?" "None." "Smethwick and I found the window latched as I left it. The lock upon the study door is uninjured, yet the desk has been searched and the book removed. Holmes passed through to the study as a physician might to a bedside. He did not at once address the absence upon the table, where the ledger had lain. Instead, he stood, motionless, in the centre of the carpet, and breathed. Then he lifted the sand shaker, looked within, and sifted a pinch upon the blotter. A faint track showed, as when a snail has crossed a stone. He held the blotter to the light. The film upon it revealed the ghost of writing reversed. He smiled, but the smile was of ice. Someone wrote here in haste and covered their work with sand, an old, careful habit. Observe, Watson, the impression, a single word, then figures, Roman numerals, 9 and 13 recur. Our thief is consistent, if nothing else. Sir Julius wrung his hands. But how, Mr. Holmes? How, in heaven's name, did he pass? The question is not how he entered, Holmes said, kneeling to inspect the hearth where last evening's ash cone had been dispersed. It is how he avoided leaving the marks a common thief would make. Smethwick, upon your oath, who holds keys to this room besides yourself and your master? No one, sir, the butler quavered. But Miss Eliza, she keeps a little key to the cabinet wherein the ledger used to rest, before Sir Julius moved it for convenience. For her music, sir. She would sometimes take the ledger to copy the gilding, patterns like, into her border designs. Holmes glanced up swiftly. Does Miss Eliza copy frequently? Of an evening, sir. She says the lamplight is kinder. Holmes rose. His gaze swept the skirting boards, the window frame, the sill. He opened the sash, thrust his hand into the outer angle, and drew it back, dusted with soot and a flake of friable mortar. No hand has recently clung here, he murmured. We are left with the internal thief. He crossed to the hall and stood within the well of the spiral stair. The iron steps ascended with their indifferent grace. Daylight fell from the top like pale water into a black throat. Holmes ascended slowly, pausing where the curve tightened at the 9th and 13th steps. From his pocket he produced a little gutting knife and, with the point, teased at the inner seam where tread met riser. Twice he drew forth a gossamer thread of something colourless that gleamed under the lens, then vanished against his cuff. Residuum of our filament, he said softly. Whoever removed the ledger returned to tidy his instrument, but haste breeds negligence. The rail, Watson, your hand upon it? I touched it and found a faint drag, as of oil almost spent, that nevertheless lent the skin a treacherous slickness. Holmes nodded. It would serve to betray a wary foot that thought to test its way. Sir Julius, you will oblige me by ordering that no hand touch this rail with cloth or solvent till I have finished with it. Lestrade arrived upon this injunction, breath puffing from him and temper already high. Post-mortem at noon, Mr. Holmes. The hyoid is intact, snap as clean as a whistle. No bruising about the throat consistent with manual pressure. A fall will serve your turn, I think. On the contrary, said Holmes, and there came into his voice that flensing edge before which even Lestrade's stubbornness is apt to step aside. A fall serves the murderer's turn. Did you find in the right palm any minute abrasion, linear, narrow, parallel? Lestrade consulted his notebook. Reluctance gave way to a grudging respect. A faint mark, yes, no more than a line's breadth at the base of the fingers. The signature of a string, taking the hand as it snatches. Holmes returned. I shall want the shoes as well, the soles especially. You shall have 'em, said Lestrade, scribbling, and you shall explain to me before I go how you mean to catch a fellow who greases rails and plays cat's cradle with stairs. By inviting him to play again, said Holmes. Criminals repeat themselves as artists do. They cannot resist their own method. Sir Julius made a little sound of despair. Another death? Must we bait the trap with flesh? With pride, Sir Julius, not flesh. Give the man what he wants in appearance, and deny him the substance. Holmes requested Smethwick's company and conducted us to the small cabinet room where the ledger had been examined. He had the butler recount step by step the hours of the previous evening, Miss Eliza's return and retreat upstairs, Sir Julius's pacing of the hall, Smethwick's rounds. Twice Holmes checked him, requesting he repeat a phrase. At last he said, "At what hour did Miss Eliza bid you good night?" "Near to 11, sir." "She asked for hot water and a pastille for her throat." "A singer's precaution," Holmes mused. "And did you fetch it?" "I did, sir." The room was dim. She had the blind down and her music laid out. I saw the crimson cord upon her stand. "The cord that binds her music," said Holmes almost to himself. "Catgut's cousin in a gaudier livery." Smethwick blinked, uncomprehending. Holmes turned to me abruptly. "Watson, be so good as to mount with me to Miss Bellwether's room. Lestrade, remain with Sir Julius. If any messenger arrives, detain him. The thief will seek to transfer his prize or to confirm its absence," we climbed. Miss Eliza's door stood ajar. At Holmes's gentle rap, her voice, cool and faintly edged, bade us enter. The chamber bore the discreet luxury which money gives and taste refines: pale papers, a French clock, a little escritoire near the window, and, upon a stand, her music bound with the familiar crimson cord. She stood by the glass, adjusting a glove, her colour delicate but steady. "Mr. Holmes," she said with a smile that did not engage the eyes, "I own I am surprised at so early a call. Does London translate grief into energy?" "Grief takes many dialects," Holmes returned, crossing to the stand. He lifted the cord between finger and thumb. "This is handsome work. A stitch like a hair, scarlet thread upon a scarlet core. Where do you purchase it?" "At Bruges and Bray," she said. "In Bond Street. Their novelty threads are famous." Holmes nodded and let the cord fall. "I have unfortunate news. The ledger upon which you sometimes practiced your gilding is missing. You did not by chance borrow it last night?" Her gaze did not waver. "I did not." "Nor see anyone upon the stairs when you retired?" "I avoid the stair," she replied with a little shiver. "I told you yesterday, it makes me giddy." Holmes moved to the escritoire. "May I?" At her languid inclination, he opened the top and examined the pigeonholes. He drew out a blank sheet, held it, and returned it. Then, deftly, he took up a book of songs, flicked the edges with his nail, and from the gutter of the binding teased a sliver pale as a fingernail. He laid it upon his card, set the lens, and gave a short, satisfied breath. "Gut," he said softly. "From a violin or a lute. Not a singer's accessory." She had turned away under the pretext of straightening a vase, but her hands had stilled. "My maestro leaves his things everywhere," she said. "He is careless." "Careless men tie perfect filaments in perfect places," Holmes murmured. "Forgive me, I speak generally." Her smile thinned. "You speak insultingly, Mr. Holmes." He bowed. "Truth has poor manners. One last inquiry and I am gone. Did Mr. Larch ever offend you?" "Offend me?" For the first time there was heat in her voice. "He condescended to me. He said my border designs were ingenious for a lady. He laughed at my notion that a binding might conceal a second spine. 'Pretty fancies,' he said. 'Keep to your notes and leave the numbers to men.' Is that offence enough?" Holmes' eyes lit as if an inner tinder had caught. "A second spine," he repeated blandly. "A charming conceit." He made her another slight bow and withdrew, drawing me with him. In the corridor he spoke under his breath, swift and clipped. "She has betrayed more than temper, Watson. A second spine in a binding is a technical term in the old binder's craft, a false back, a place for the smuggler and the conspirator. Our ledger was doctored. Larch knew it or suspected it. He wrote Campanile. He marked our steps. He brought opium to steady a nerve or dull another's. He descended and died. The thief has now the book, and if I am right, the book has the thief, caught by his own need to open what it contains. Before I could reply, Smethwick's voice rose from below, urgent and cracked. "Sir! Mr. Holmes, a messenger, here!" We descended to find a youth in a porter's cap at the door, his fingers twisting around a sealed envelope. Lestrade had the boy by the elbow, with a grip that would have served for a felon. "Came with this," he said. "Said it was for the hand of Sir Julius only, and that he was to wait for an answer." Wax is scarlet. Holmes took the letter, turned it in his fingers, and held the seal to the light. The impress was of a bell within a ring, the very device a Venetian might use to flatter the eye. He broke it neatly and read. As he did, a rare animation transformed him. He passed the sheet to me with a little hiss of breath. The note, in a small, precise hand, ran thus. "Sir Julius, the book you cherish is unsafe in your house. There are those who will kill for what it hides. If you value your niece's peace, send no constable after it. A friend will communicate at the 13th hour. No signature, only at the foot. 2 Roman numerals, 13. Holmes laughed, a single, gleeful note without mirth. Our adversary cannot keep his fingers from his favourite numbers. Lestrade, release the lad. He is a mouthpiece only. Sir Julius, you will receive a second communication at 1 o'clock. We shall be ready before 12. I mean to place a hand where our friend expects a foot, and a foot where he thinks no hand exists. Watson, the violin string in my drawer, the thinnest. We shall teach the spiral to sing another tune. Holmes sent me across the street to the little tobacconist for a skein of soft cord and a cake of violin rosin, while he borrowed from Sir Julius a handful of French chalk used by the footman for polishing boots. When I returned, he had Lestrade and Smethwick stationed in the hall and had cleared the central space about the stair so that its well stood, revealed like the throat of a well. He moved with a controlled urgency I had come to recognize as the prelude to his most careful traps. "Attend me, both of you," he said. "Our man thinks in curves and tension. We shall answer him with straight lines and friction." He climbed to the 7th step, and with my help tied the soft cord invisibly to the inner scrollwork, carrying it across to the 10th at a height to brush the instep rather than trip the toe. A second, finer hair, my thinnest violin string, he fastened lower down between the 11th and 12th treads, but not taut. It lay with the merest suggestion of resistance, enough to complain if a heel dragged across it. Then with the rosin he dressed 2 precise spans of the handrail, one at the 8th step and one at the 14th, rubbing until the wood took a thin, invisible grain. He dusted the edges of the 9th and 13th risers with the chalk, blown from a pinch held in his palm. "Chalk to mark our dancers' feet," he murmured, "rosin to catch his hands, and a lamenting string to give us the note of his stride. Lestrade, you and your men will keep to the drawing-room. Step when I call, and not before. Smethwick, no visitor goes beyond the hall without my eye upon him. Sir Julius, favour us by sitting in your study, as if nothing had altered. When the bell announces 1 o'clock, the 13th hour, by our correspondent's conceit, do nothing. I shall answer it. Sir Julius looked as if the 13th hour had already told his ruin, but he bowed and withdrew. Holmes and I concealed ourselves in the little cabinet room at the stairs base with the door ajar an inch, through which we could view the lower coil of the spiral. The house settled into that expectant quiet peculiar to London rooms when the traffic outside holds breath to hear a drama within. My own heart kept a timepiece of its own. At 12 minutes past the hour, a hansom rattled to a clumsy halt. Smethwick's voice droned, deferential and guarded. The answer that came was fluting and foreign. "Signor Torreggiani waits upon Sir Julius," Smethwick announced. "Shall I?" Holmes moved his head a fraction. "Admit him." Alone. And Smethwick, watch his hands. The maestro entered with a bow of extravagant contrition. He wore a new boutonniere and a face polished to penitence. A roll of music lay in his arm, bound. My eye went to it as a hound's to a scent, with that familiar crimson cord. "My dear Sir Julius," he cried, opening his hands, "I have dreamed of your ledger all night." "I come to beg your pardon for my rash tongue. I spoke as an artist, too quick to judge. Permit that I see again the binding, and I shall confess my error." Sir Julius, whose courage lay chiefly in writing chairs, glanced toward our hiding place and said nothing. Holmes, behind the door, made me the briefest sign: patience. The maestro's glance skimmed the hall, slid up the stair and back again with practised lightness, and drifted at last to the clock upon the mantel. "Ah," he said softly, almost to himself, "we draw near the unlucky hour. In Venice, no man climbs a campanile upon the stroke. The bell frightens the saints." Smethwick moved, and Torreggiani's smile was suddenly too easy. He stroked his glove over the rail with the air of a man idle in conversation, lifted his hand, and frowned the smallest frown at the stick of tackiness the Rosen gave him. He placed his palm more carefully the second time, and began to mount, smooth as a cat upon a garden wall. Holmes's breath barely stirred. At the 8th step, the maestro's hand found rosin again. At the 9th, his instep brushed the dusted riser. A ghost of chalk kissed the gloss of his boot. At the 10th, the soft cord grazed his foot. I heard, rather than saw, the minute catch of his breath. His weight shifted, testing, as a man will who fears a trap, yet cannot admit fear. He descended, feigning indifference, his glove flicking imaginary dust from his sleeve. "Not today," he said lightly. "Another time, perhaps. I see you are engaged." Sir Julius Holmes moved like a striking heron. He was before the Italian in 3 long steps, his arm as polite as a gentleman's, and as inexorable as a jailer's. "Another time, maestro." "You are punctual for this one. Your hands, if you please." Torreggiani's laugh had too much silver. "My hands? Ah, you admire the rings." Holmes held up the maestro's right glove to the light so that the rosin grain showed, and the faintest bloom of chalk upon the instep of his boot. He touched with a nail a nearly invisible strand caught at the base of the glove where the seam met the palm. The violin string had sung to it. He did not look up. "You have rehearsed this stair, sir? You know its 10th step as you know your own scale." The Italian's eyes flashed, then hooded. "If I walked, I learned." It is a beautiful object, this stair. A sculptor of iron, attractive to men who appreciate line, Holmes said coolly, and to those who need to measure force. Yet I think you came today for speech, not for flight. "Who writes your notes?" The maestro's brows lifted with innocence. "Notes are my business." Smethwick, who had a dog's sense for his master's peril, had edged toward the door. A second bell sounded, sharp as a nerve. 1 o'clock. Holmes's head turned. "Answer it, Smethwick. Bring what is brought." The butler took the envelope that the same porter's lad thrust forward and brought it, as if it were a coal from hell, to Sir Julius. Holmes intercepted, broke the scarlet seal, and read. His eyes hardened. "Send the ledger at once by the bearer," he quoted, "or you will read of a woman's fall on the night editions. Place no man upon the stair. The bell will ring again at the quarter hour. 13. Sir Julius made a strangled sound. "Eliza!" Torreggiani's mask slipped. A genuine consternation tore through it. "Signore, this is monstrous." Holmes's look speared him. "More monstrous than preparing a rail to betray a hand, fan laying a thread to snare a foot. Who has the ledger, maestro?" The Italian flung out his hands. "Not I. I swear by all the saints." He checked himself, the oath dying as a wiser instinct cautioned. "I came to warn, yes, to warn, because I feared the very thing this letter threatens." Holmes' fingers drummed once upon the envelope. "You feared it enough to rehearse your escape." Torreggiani sagged against the rail, then winced at the tack that met his palm. His voice, when it came, was low and desperate. "You will not believe me, but I have an enemy in this house more supple than catgut. She has eyes where I have vanity, and a patience I do not possess. She sent me word last night that the ledger would be safer in my keeping than Sir Julius. I did not touch it, I did not, but I came to see if the threat was true." Holmes' glance flicked, hawk-fast, toward the landing above, where a shadow had altered. I followed it. A lace edge stirred. A door closed softly, too softly. "Eliza," Sir Julius whispered, dread and love at war in his breast. Holmes's hand closed on my arm. "Watson up. Lestrade, 2 men at the rear. Smethwick, bolt the front. No one enters, no one leaves." We mounted with caution born of our own trap. At the 13th step, Holmes bent, touched the riser, and then straightened. "He is consistent, our friend," he said softly, "and she is playing his number." Miss Bellwether's door gave to Holmes' knuckles at once. She stood within, pale as the blind behind her, a small portmanteau open upon the bed, and a roll of music beside it, the crimson cord coiled like a serpent. On the escritoire lay a knife of the kind binders used to lift leather. Her eyes went from Holmes to me and back, and there was in them a steadiness that chilled me. "You are very prompt."
"Mr. Holmes," she said, "more prompt than your inspector. If I scream, the house will fly to pieces. Shall we be calm?" Holmes's voice, when he spoke, had emptied itself of everything but comprehension. "You have the ledger." "I have," she said simply, and laid her hand on the portmanteau. "And if my uncle is to keep his name out of a disgrace worse than ruin, you will let me take it where it belongs." "Which is?" Holmes asked, though his eyes had already gone to the crimson thread and the gut's pale cousin glinting at the page's gutter. She smiled, a little bitter curve. "To the bell tower, Mr. Holmes. To the stairs where the numbers make sense. From below, as if London itself conspired with fate, the clock in the parlour struck the quarter, and with it the distant boom of St. Martin's bells rolled through the damp air." Holmes's hand opened and closed once. He did not yet move. "Then," he said very quietly, "we must walk together. For if you take another step alone upon a spiral today, Miss Bellwether, it will not be your music the city hears." Holmes's injunction fell as softly as silk and held like cordage. Miss Bellwether's gaze measured him, reckoned the odds, and, for the moment, accepted them. She closed the portmanteau with a click that might as well have been the sound of a mask retying its strings. "You may escort me," she said, "but I do not surrender the book." "You surrender the conditions," Holmes returned, his tone almost courteous. "You will walk between Dr. Watson and myself. You will not touch the stair rail with either hand, and you will allow me one liberty." With a conjurer's ease, he passed his fingers along the roll of music and its crimson cord. When they came away, the cord's final whip-stitched tail bore a dusting bloom that only the closest eye could have detected. French chalk, he explained, as much to me as to her. We shall know if the serpent slithers. He slipped the binder's knife from the escritoire into his own pocket. You will not need this for the piano. Lestrade met us on the landing with a pair of constables. Sir Julius hovered behind, grey with dread. Holmes spoke quickly, in that paired register which admits no waste. The note threatens a woman's fall if the ledger is not moved. The threat is theatrical and, like most theatre, relies upon control of the stage. We are changing houses. Lestrade, a cab for 4. Smethwick, lock your door behind us and suffer no messenger further. Sir Julius, remain by your fire and count no hours that are not struck in your presence. The hansom bore us west and a little south, through a London that had applied a veil of mist rather than a mask. Every line of cornice and lamp was softened, and the bells of several parishes tolled like muffled warnings above the clatter of wheels. Between Piccadilly and the river, Holmes tapped the roof twice and had the driver turn down.
Toward Fleet Street. Why not St. Martin's, Holmes? I asked, recognizing the divergence from what the quarter hour had announced. Because our adversary expects a mind to move in straight lines, he said. He writes Campanile and blows St. Martin's name into the air as coarsely as a fishmonger blows sawdust. The true Venetian among our spires is St. Bride's, Wren's wedding cake, which has a spiral more intimate than St. Martin's and steps that a careful man could measure with a lover's patience. Torrigiani, opposite me, lifted his hands in a fervour that might have been relief or art. Ah, San Bride. She is like our Santa Maria della Salute. Bellissima. I have played under her stones for the printer's charity. Miss Bellwether said nothing. Her gloved hand lay upon the leather of the portmanteau with the composure of a white bird at roost. Only the faintest trace of chalk upon the cord marked her to my eye as participant in our stratagem rather than its architect. The verger at St. Bride's was a stooped little man with keys enough to anchor a skiff. Holmes passed him a card and a coin without ceremony, and spoke a quiet word which seemed to shift the axis of the verger's world. The keys became a benediction, the stair a sacrament. We were admitted by a side door and stood at the foot of a spiral enclosed in pale stone, the treads worn to a shallow dish by centuries of feet. The air had the chill that belongs to churches below ground, and there was a dryness to it, the dust of old lime and older prayers that put me in mind of vaults. Holmes produced his lens at once and went to one knee upon the 3rd tread, then the 5th, then the 9th. He did not smile, he breathed in, as a violinist draws breath with the bow's first stroke. Here, he murmured. To the naked eye there was nothing. Under the lens, upon the inner lip, where riser met tread, I saw a faint bruising of the stone, no broader than a hair, and within it, wedged so deep that only Holmes' smallest blade could tease it out, the transparent ghost of a filament. He drew it forth, and it lay across his card like the sloughed skin of some minute serpent. He touched it to his tongue and made a face. Gut again, and carbolic, fresh within a day, he mounted, pausing with mechanical regularity, and at the 13th step he put his palm very lightly to the wall, then sniffed his glove. Egyptian paper, he said, smoked here. He watches from above or below. He has the patience of a sacristan. Lestrade had placed his men sensibly, one at the bottom door, one within the nave. He leaned toward me and whispered, "If the fellow shows a whisker, I'll have him by the snout." "Not a whisker," Holmes said without looking round. "He will show you a shadow. He moves when we move. We must deprive him of motion." He turned to Miss Bellwether. You will carry the portmanteau, ma'am, but not ascend. Stand here, Dr. Watson, beside her, if you please. Maestro, your vanity may at last be useful. Sing very softly in the second step of each ascent, as if you climbed. Your breath will make a tempo. Lestrade, count with me. He took from his pocket the violin string I had seen him pocket in Bellwether House. With a speed that was half thought and half hands, he fastened it between the 11th and 12th treads, so that it lay an inch above the stone and an inch within the inner curve, precisely where a hurrying heel, drawing inward, would grate it. From his other pocket, preparedness being in him a species of morality, he shook a pinch of French chalk and breathed it out along the 13th riser. He rubbed his own fingers across the rail, not to set Rosin. Wood and age had roughened it enough, but to learn its story. He nodded once, satisfied. Now, he said, we do not climb, we merely say we do. Torreggiani obeyed with a will. He half-whispered a phrase from a hymn, a bar for each feigned step, and between each bar let his breath fall with that sighing quality a man acquires after stairs. I, who know little of legerdemain and less of venery, cannot describe the nerve with which Holmes held us all in a poised pretence. It seemed to me that even the stair listened. Presently, from above, very faintly, came an answering whisper of shoe leather, a cautious laying down of weight, then the smallest rasp, the violin string's complaint. Holmes's head turned as a hound's turns when the wind carries him certainty. He did not look up, he looked down. His hand flashed to the wall at the inner curve between 12 and 13. With the binder's knife he had preserved from Miss Bellwether's escritoire, he slid the blade into a joint where mortar showed cleaner than its neighbours. The stone yielded with the reluctance of a drawer that has not been opened for years. Behind it was a niche no bigger than a man's hand. Within the niche lay a cylinder of tin, painted the dull black a locksmith favours to make metal invisible in shadow. Holmes withdrew it, cracked the end, and shook out a roll of vellum strips bound with, my heart leapt, the twin of our crimson thread. Upon the outermost strip was the impress of a seal, a little bell within a ring. Holmes' voice was very low. Our bell device, our 13th, our friend. And a hiding place between 9 and 13, he rehearsed his theatre in Bellwether's Stair and staged his performance here. The steps above ceased. A breath gathered, then the lightest scuttle, flight, not advance. Lestrade shouted, and his man at the nave door answered with a curse. A shadow dropped past the stair aperture, no more than a flicker, but enough to send a chill through me. "Down!" Holmes cried. "We went as men go when their nerves have decided before their bodies. Sideways, inward, with care for string and chalk and the line of the wall. We burst from the stair into the nave as the far door swung upon its chain, and the verger, white as his keys, pointed with a trembling hand. Out through the vestry. He's nimble as a flea. Lestrade and one constable sprang for the door. I turned to Holmes. He had already slipped the vellum back into its tin, the tin into his pocket, and his attention, curiously, almost disturbingly, was upon Miss Bellwether. She had not stirred, only now did the breath leave her in a slow tide, and with it, though no hand had brushed her, the faintest fall of chalk from the cord upon the portmanteau to the flag at her feet. Her eyes, when they rose to meet Holmes, held not fear, but a fierce, exhausted triumph. "You have it," she said. "I do," Holmes answered. "But I have not yet the hand that killed Mr. Larch. Will you help me choose it?" Her gaze slid, not to Torreggiani, whose operatic terror had the unfortunate effect of resembling a rehearsal, but across the aisle to where a figure had appeared, breathless, in the inner porch. A young man in a porter's cap, the very lad who had twice delivered scarlet-sealed threats to Bellwether House. He paused, startled to find his stage so full. In that pause the cap slipped a fraction and showed, beneath the cheap brim, hair cut with the fastidiousness of a clerk, not a runner, and a line of jaw too assured for a mere errand boy. Holmes's pipe case snapped shut in his pocket like a pistol. "Mr. Quill," he said, with a courtesy that would have served in a drawing-room, "be so good as to take off your cap." The lad's eyes flared. His hand twitched toward the door. Torreggiani moved as if to intercept him, and in that instant the boy chose a third path neither of flight nor surrender. He darted not outwards but along the side aisle toward the belfry ladder, sprang for the rungs like a street cat, and went up, light, swift, sure as a dancer. Holmes's face, austere, transfigured by purpose, tilted to the climb. "Back to the spiral," he said, already moving. "The play is not done because we have found the prop room, Watson. It ends only when we have the actor, or the actor has the drop." Holmes was already upon the lowest rungs when I sprang after him, the belfry ladder trembling like a struck reed under our combined haste. Above us the dark square of the trap gave upon a dusk where timbered braces crossed, and the bell ropes hung like giant tendons from a stone ceiling. The air had that dry, ancient tang of dust that has forgotten the hands which raised it. Quill, if that were his true name, climbed as a cat runs, not in bounds, but in a quick economy of motion that wastes nothing. "Steady, Watson," Holmes called softly, not looking down. "This fellow likes an edge." We gained the platform as the first bell in the tier swung with a warning creak in its gudgeons, the tongue within it quivering. Quill had crossed to the further stair, another spiral, this one of oak, which wound toward the louvred openings beneath the spire. He looked back once. In that instant I saw his face unmasked by the cap, a young man's features sharpened by care rather than vice, the mouth set in the straight line of the clerk, but the eyes, those were not a clerk's. They had the keen watchfulness of a man who lives by timing. Lestrade and his constable thudded onto the platform behind us, while down below the verger's alarmed voice rose and fell like a minor hymn. Miss Bellwether and the maestro were out of sight. Only the faint gleam of the portmanteau's brass corner remained in my mind's eye like a lure. Quill took the inner radius of the wooden spiral with that same dancer's precision we had heard upon stone. Holmes halted me with 2 fingers upon my sleeve and stooped to the tread we were about to take. "See," he whispered. A filament, fine as a hair, had been wound between the uprights of the balustrade, just at knee-height, where a pursuer's leg, turning the tight curve, would scythe it. It was not catgut, but gut's cousin, the silken core of a harp-string, I thought, with a tack to fix it on either side. Holmes drew it aside with the blade he had taken from Miss Bellwether's escritoire and twanged it once. It sang, a wicked little note, swallowed by timber. "Our friend came furnished," he murmured. "He meant us to come on the instant of his choosing." Quill heard that single, betraying note. He did not look back again. He went on with the same measured haste to the next landing, where the great wheel of the tenor bell's rope passed in its groove, and there his hand moved, quick as a pickpocket's, to the knot. "Down!" Holmes snapped. We flattened as the rope leapt and the bell above us stirred. A toll is no gentle thing when you stand in its throat. The first stroke fell like a physical blow. The timber quivered, dust came down in a silver rain. The second stroke found us braced and turned us half-deaf. Quill threw his weight upon the tail of the rope to keep it in swing, and then, while the huge heart overhead boomed its indifferent course, he slipped past it, nimble as a weaver's shuttle, and broke into a run for the Louvre. Lestrade swore, tying his handkerchief about his ears as if the cloth were a charm. "I'll have him!" "Wait!" cried Holmes, too late. The inspector hurled himself across, and the rope at the bell's backward swing kissed his shoulder. Another pace, and it might have kissed him into eternity. I dragged him by the collar, and we went on together, Holmes above, I guarding Lestrade with a hand as one guards a sleepwalker. We burst into the light-shot space beneath the spire where the Louvres opened onto Fleet Street's roofscape, and the fog lay like folded linen along the parapets. Quill had forced one shutter and stood with a foot upon the stone lip. There was no balcony. Below him the lead roof sloped treacherously to a gutter where rainwater darkened the edge. Beyond, a narrow run of coping, the width of a man's
hand led toward the stair turret on the far side. "Don't be a fool!" Lestrade shouted, cupping his mouth. The bell answered him with an iron syllable. Quill turned his head a fraction. His lips moved, but the bellow obliterated all speech. Holmes did not waste his lungs. He lifted his hand and showed the tin cylinder, as a fisherman shows a hooked trout. The boy froze. The calculation in his face shifted. In, not out. He looked from the tin to the void, and I saw in that pendulum swing a life measuring itself against two disasters. Then he chose not the street, not the stair, but the stone. He went out upon the coping as calmly as a man skirts a puddle, and for 3 steps I thought him some manner of high walker born. On the 4th he faltered. The lead beneath his heel had bloomed a slick with last night's rain, and his arm pinwheeled, wild and horribly human. Holmes moved with a speed that had in it no haste. He flung himself flat, reached beyond his own safety with that long, sinewy arm, and caught Quill's wrist over the void. I saw the tendons in Holmes's forearm stand like cords and the muscles along his jaw clamp. Lestrade and I both seized Holmes by the belt and boot, anchoring him to the floor, as if he too might be whipped over the lip. "Take my other hand," I shouted, but Quill's free hand had gone to the stone, seeking, scraping. The bell's 3rd stroke climbed the wood and stone and into our bones. When it ebbed, a single word from Quill reached us, very level. "Don't!" He did not plead, he did not curse. He simply set his weight cunningly, put his left foot against the lead seam, and with a wrestler's twist transferred enough momentum to push his own arm inward while not dragging Holmes outward. It was a grim bit of physics done by nerve and instinct rather than thought. His hand slid into ours. We hauled him in by degrees. The stone rasped his boots, the Louvre's edge left a savage dent in his shin, and then he lay upon the boards, white, panting, as unlovely as any saved man always is. Lestrade fell on him with handcuffs. Quill did not resist. He sat, his chest heaving, and his eyes, very grey now that the cap was gone, went first to the tin cylinder, and then to Miss Bellwether, who had come as far as the landing, and no further, her face a pale oval in the shadow like the moon in low cloud. Torreggiani hovered behind her, hands fluttering with extravagant uselessness. "Name," Lestrade grated, "and the truth with it." "Ephraim Quill," the young man said, finding his breath. "Clerk to Mr. Sedgwick, solicitor to Sir Julius Bellwether, messenger by necessity, errand boy by convenience, thief by—" He glanced once at Holmes. "By compulsion." Holmes's brows twitched. "A compulsion which kills antiquarians on iron stairs?" Quill's composure cracked and mended. He shook his head, a tight, vehement movement. "I did not kill Mr. Larch. I feared him. Yes, he was on the scent, but I did not know." His gaze flicked to the cylinder again. "You have taken it. Then you know, we know only, that a hand with a bell for a sign hid vellum in a church wall,
and rehearsed a death between 9 and 13. Holmes returned. The rest waits upon your tongue. Speak, and speak quickly. There are clocks in this city that prefer one story to another. Quill swallowed. Some of the clerk's primness returned. Like a habit his nerves fell back upon. Sir Julius's fortune is paper, Mr. Holmes, paper in the city and paper in Venice, paper carried by boats and paper made by men. In that ledger there are accounts that do not bear the light, the remains of old forgeries, the transport of certain bonds. Years ago your name made the air cold to the forger's lungs, but paper leaves ashes, and ashes do not always blow where one wants. Mr. Larch knew the trade. He guessed that the ledger had a false back. I found the vellum within it first, months ago, when Sir Julius had me copy the folios that touched a Venetian warehouse. The vellum, you have seen it. The seal of a bell within a ring, Holmes said softly. Quill's mouth twisted. The device of a circle of men, the bell ring, who smuggled securities through the ports by making the paper walk as easily as a man? Sir Julius owed them money and safety in his youth. In his age he paid in silence. I stole nothing. I only moved what would have hanged him if the police came upon it in his desk. I hid the vellum at St. Bride's, the printer's church, because the bell ring used its crypt for meetings when I was a boy, and because bells keep better time than men. I sent the notes to keep them from sending knives. Holmes's eyes had narrowed to slits. And the threats? A woman's fall? Quill looked past us to Eliza, and for the first time colour touched his pallor. They wrote that, not I. They wrote to me as well. Orders, warnings. I thought, if I made a theatre of it, if I frightened Sir Julius into obeying, if I kept the police moving in circles, it would buy me time to get the vellum out of England. Campanile, Holmes breathed. The word was not addressed to any of us. A bell tower, Venice again, and the rehearsal upon Bellwether's stairs. Quill's face changed. A muscle jumped in his cheek. I have measured many stairs since I was 12. I could contrive a fall, yes, but that grease upon the rail, those catgut snares, I found them set when I went at night to see if the ledger still lay in Sir Julius's study. I avoided them. Mr. Larch did not. You expect me to credit an unknown hand? Lestrade demanded. Quill's gaze slid once more to Eliza. Not unknown. Only unadmitted Miss Bellwether met his look without flinching. If you mean me, Mr. Quill, she said, her voice very clear despite the bell above that still boomed to its unfelt congregation, then you have measured the wrong person. I set nothing that kills. I take things that lie and I hide them better. Holmes made the smallest sound. Approval or warning, I could not tell. He had drawn the cylinder half from his pocket and was turning the seal with the nail of his thumb in an absent fashion that always meant a thought was breaking surface. The bell ring, he said at last. Sir Julius a debtor to rogues, a clerk entangled, an antiquarian who laughed at ladies and numbers, laughed and then began to count, and between them a musician who loved line and a woman who understood bindings. We have found the bell and its rope. We have not yet found the hand that pulled. The bell finished its peal with a shiver that ran through the timber like a released breath. In the brief quiet that followed, below in the nave a door banged, and the verger's voice, frightened, apologetic, floated up. Beg pardon, sirs, but there's a lady asking for Mr. Holmes. Says she knows something about strings. Holmes's head came up. His face had the pale, eager light I knew too well. Strings, he repeated softly. Watson, we are about to hear the second instrument enter. The verger's keys went pattering away like frightened beetles, and in a moment he returned, ushering a woman into the nave with the ceremony, due to a duchess and the anxiety proper to a church mouse. She was not young, the years had thinned her, but left in her carriage a precision that spoke of long habits of exactness. Her hands, though gloved, had the flattened tips and tiny calluses of one who ties and unties hundreds of small knots in a week. "Mr. Holmes?" she said, with a brisk inclination. "Dinah Pargeter, forewoman at Bruges and Bray, threads and fancy cords, Bond Street. The verger said you were concerned with strings. I am concerned with a very particular order for strings placed this past fortnight, and with where those strings have gone." Holmes's eyes had the quick sparkle that tells me he has heard the violin begin to tune. "You are doubly welcome, Miss Pargeter." "Speak as if you were pricing lace." She drew from her reticule a little packet, brown-papered and neat, and opened it upon the top of a pew. Within lay 3 offcuts of gut, each whipped at the ends with coloured silk, one plain, one with a smear that my nose recognized even before my eyes named it, and one whose whipping was of the very scarlet that had become a leitmotif in our affair. "We keep records," she said crisply. "Last Monday a lady purchased scarlet whip thread, our carmine number, 3, together with a binder's knife of French make. She paid in cash. She knew what she wanted and handled the knife like one who has had cause to use a spud, not a parlour toy. She smelled faintly of violets. Miss Bellwether, who had come down from the landing, did not move. A little colour came and went in her cheek, as delicate as the light when clouds cross a winter sun. 3 days later, Miss Pargeter went on, a gentleman ordered lengths of unwound plain gut, 18 inches apiece, not looped, an odd request from a musician who prefers wound strings in London damp. He asked whether carbolic would harden the gut, and whether a wash in wax would keep it pliant. He did not give his name. He sent a porter to collect. The porter is that lad. She tilted her chin at Quill with professional disapproval. I told myself it was no business of mine, but then the newspapers spoke of an accident upon a spiral stair, and I have tied enough gut on harps and viols to know when it is meant to sing and when it is meant to bite. Holmes regarded the offcuts with a child's delight, subdued to a surgeon's gravity. "The lady, Miss Pargeter, can you describe her?" "Modishly slender, pale and steady," she returned. She wore gloves and did not remove them to count her change. She kept her veil down, but it takes more than net to hide a person. She had that air some young ladies have now of meaning, to be accounted in the world's serious business. Holmes's glance, quick as a shuttle, touched Eliza and passed on. "And the gentleman?" "Foreign, by his vowels," said Miss Pargeter, "but his hands were clerk's hands, not an artist's. Ink sits differently upon the first finger of a copyist than rosin sits upon a player's thumb. He smelt of cheap hair tonic and decent tobacco, not your showy Egyptian leaf. He did not look at me when he spoke. He looked at my stock, as if he meant to remember how much I had." Quill lifted his chin. "I fetched that parcel," he said quietly, "but I did not place the order. I carried what I was told." "By whom?" Lestrade snapped. Quill's eyes went to the maestro, then to Eliza, and then, unexpectedly, to no one. "By a note left at my lodgings," he said, "sealed with a bell. I have kept the envelopes. The hand is small and neat." Holmes's finger tapped the tin cylinder in his pocket. 1, 2, 3, then stilled. "You have done very well, Miss Pargeter. Your conscience is as serviceable as your wares. One question more. Do you recognize this whipping?" He indicated the scarlet silk at the gut's end. She permitted herself the faintest smile. "Carmine number. 3, as I said. We sell much of it to young ladies for music rolls these days." It holds prettily and shows well against Black Eliza's breath left her in something like a laugh, though there was no mirth in it. "We are all to be hanged, Mr. Holmes," she said, very low, "by a thread we bought ourselves." Holmes's gaze softened by a degree, a rare charity in that ascetic face. "Threads are innocent until guided by hands, and there, Miss Bellwether, lies our road." He turned on his heel. "Lestrade, you will take Mr. Quill to the vestry and keep him there with a constable. Let him show you the envelopes with the bell seal when we return to Baker Street. I fancy their paper will confess a
habit of a particular shop. Maestro, if you will do me the kindness of remembering that you are a musician and not a rope dancer, you will remain in the verger's company until I send for you. Miss Pargeter, you have my gratitude. Pray keep your receipts to hand. They may yet turn a jury's eye." "And you, Mr. Holmes?" I asked, as he was already moving. "To Bellwether House," he said. "We must see how a conscience looks by daylight." We found Sir Julius where we had left him, but older by 10 years. Worry had narrowed him to his essentials. Smethwick's composure, on the other hand, had crystallized into something like defiance, not towards us, but toward the invisibles who would presume to make a stage of his master's hall. He took our coats as if they were insults offered by weather, and set his thin shoulders like a shield between Eliza and the world. Holmes stood in the centre of the hall under the spiral and let the house speak to him. I have seen him listen to a room before, hears with his eyes, sees with his nose, and I have learned not to breathe upon such moments. "Sir Julius," he said at last, "your niece bought thread and a knife. Your clerk fetched gut. Your maestro smokes Egyptians and measured stairs. You have, each of you, touched one instrument, but Mr. Larch's death required a conductor." Sir Julius's hands trembled. "Name him, Mr. Holmes, and I shall turn him from my door." Holmes's look went to Smethwick, not accusingly, but with that attention which is more acute than accusation. "You scrub with carbolic," he said mildly. "You polish with French chalk. You are by nature a fastidious man. Tell me, when did you last have your boots mended?" The question was so unexpected that even I started. Smethwick's eyes flicked down and back. "A month ago, sir." Holmes stooped, took up one of the butler's shoes from the rack. Smethwick, methodical to the end, kept a second pair by the door, held the sole to the light, and nodded. "Straight lasted, the heels honest. You, I think, would not place a foot upon a string trap if all the clocks in St. Paul's commanded it." He set the shoe down and crossed to the study. We followed. In the light that fell rather mournfully upon the empty space where the ledger had lain, he went to the chair behind the desk and placed 2 fingers upon the leather of the arm, very near the tack heads that held the facing. Then with a nail he lifted the leather an inch, no more, and showed us beneath a neat repair, made long ago with scarlet whip stitches as fine as hair. "Not a binder's stitch," he said, "a lady's. Eliza Bellwether," he turned to her with that grave courtesy of his, "you have mended this house where you could. You have also mended what could not in honour be left whole. You knew of your uncle's entanglements. You tried to spirit the evidence away. That is your guilt. Keep it entire. Do not add another's." To it she did not flinch. "Whose then?" Holmes' hand drifted from the chair to the desk's blotter, where the ghost of last night's sand still lay. He turned it, held it to the light so that the reversed impressions showed, and set it down before Sir Julius. 9:13, and a hand that dots its I with a hair's breadth to the right, and shapes its R with a lawyer's hook. I have seen that hand upon opinions in Chancery. Sir Julius recoiled, as if struck. "Sedgwick?" "The bell-ring's solicitor drew your contracts, hid your liens, and,
when your antiquarian began to count aloud, wrote to your clerk with a bell upon the wax and sent a boy to fetch gut, said Holmes, very level. He needed access, he had it by your trust. He needed a house that would mask a fall as accident. He urged you last month to have your stair repaired, and the Iron Man marked 2 treads, our 9 and 13, for him. He needed a rail's treachery. The carbolic and dripping in Smethwick's kitchen gave it to his hand. He needed a scapegoat. He found one in a Venetian maestro with vanity enough to look guilty. He needed silence. He chose a scholar whose pride would not let him cry out. Sir Julius had covered his face. Smethwick made a small, raw sound one hears from men who have served long and been told their faith was a jest. Eliza stood as still as winter grass. Holmes's voice softened. "Send for Mr. Sedgwick, Sir Julius. Ask him, as a client asks a friend, to bring the account books for the Venetian concerns, and to attend you upon the stroke of 7 this evening. Lestrade will be here, and I with him. We will see whether he prefers Egyptian cigarette or honest London air. And if he should approach your stair, I will know by which foot he means to descend." Eliza's eyes came to mine then, and I read in them the conflict of love and rage that must tear a heart bred to loyalty when loyalty becomes indistinguishable from cowardice. She said nothing. She did not need to. Holmes had set the next movement. The house itself seemed to draw breath for the cord. Dusk put its blue fingers upon Bloomsbury as we arranged our stage. Holmes was particular to a nicety. The chalk at the 9th and 13th risers was renewed. A fresh, invisible breath of rosin lay upon the inner rail, and between the 11th and 12th treads he stretched, not taut, but ready to complain, the whisper of a string. In the study he set a shaded lamp and laid upon the desk, not the tin from St. Bride's, which he kept upon his person, but an old ledger of similar girth wrapped in brown paper and sealed with the same carmine wax Miss Pargeter had named. Sir Julius, tremulous but obedient, was to receive his solicitor exactly as though the day had been empty of bells and deaths. Smethwick had orders to admit and then vanish. Lestrade and I took our old post in the cabinet room with the door a finger's breadth ajar, and Eliza, at Holmes's firm request, remained in her chamber, where her silence would be a testimony as potent as any oath. 7 struck from a distant clock, and with the 3rd stroke the knocker announced a punctual conscience. Mr. Sedgwick crossed the threshold with the soft authority of a man accustomed to making bad weather sound like advice. He was of middle height, compact, and dressed with that dryness which the better class of city lawyers affect. Cloth that says nothing, linen that confesses nothing, a hat brim that neither invites nor forbids confidence. His eyes were pale and workmanlike. His mouth had the small pedant's neatness. His fingers were clean to the nail, but the rim of each showed the faint, corrosive bloom of carbolic, such as clerks who haunt their own offices of an evening acquire from washing their hands where no maid attends. "My dear Sir Julius," he said, with a bow that avoided warmth, "I have come at your summons with the Venetian accounts and a frank regret for last night's calamity. Larch was zealous, but not vicious. The world may spare a zealot. How can I serve you?" "By looking at a paper," Sir Julius faltered, and indicated the desk. "I have found something." Sedgwick's glance touched the parcel as a surgeon's finger touches a pulse, without appearing to press. The small muscles about his nostrils tightened and were at once still. "Indeed." He placed his umbrella in the rack and his hat upon the table's edge so that the brim turned inward. That trivial detail made my skin creep. A man who turns his hat toward his own thigh when he sets it down takes habitually thought for exit. Holmes had forewarned Sir Julius against speech beyond the line given. The old man held to his cue bravely. "I would beg your judgment upon it. Mr. Holmes," he swallowed, "is also in the house." "Ah?" Sedgwick's lids lowered a shade. "Then we shall all be wiser by bedtime." He broke the seal with a thumbnail, the movement was practised, and drew back the paper to show the counterfeit ledger within. "You were right to send," he said evenly. "This is precisely the sort of object that invites misinterpretation." His hand hovered an instant, then withdrew. "We must take every care." He stood at ease and in command, and yet I had the sense of a spring held by a finger. He turned away from the desk with that same unpressing certainty and moved into the hall. "Mr. Holmes must be fetched," he said. "I will call him up." He had not asked where Holmes stood. He had not paused as a guest does. He went to the stair as a man goes to the place he has chosen. In the dimness of the well he placed his palm upon the inner rail, a light, testing touch which came away with the barest memory of grain. He did not look at his hand. At the 9th step his instep kissed the dust we had sown. His boot took it in the exact crescent we had seen on the iron, the print of a right shoe that turned inward by habit, not clumsiness. He mounted to the 10th with a care too careful for ignorance, and at the 11th the string sang, the faintest protest of metal under heel. He froze, then he smiled to himself and descended one step, smoothing his glove along the rail as an idle man's hand idles. Holmes no longer waited. He was out of the cabinet in 2 gliding paces, and his voice, pleasant, cold, filled the hall. "Do not trouble yourself, Mr. Sedgwick. I am here." The solicitor turned with admirable speed, and in that turn the last of his masks slipped into the only honest one he owned, the face of a man caught between 2 calculations. He chose at once, and chose attack. "Mr. Holmes," he said, and contrived the ghost of a bow, "your reputation runs before you like a thief-taker's lantern. I was examining the stair upon which our friend Mr. Larch came to grief. It is prudent to know one's ground. It is a sentiment you have honoured," Holmes returned. "You knew it last month when you urged Sir Julius to have the 9th and 13th treads repaired, and you knew it last night when you walked this curve in the quiet hours and learned where a cautious hand would find treachery." Sedgwick's pale eyes did not blink. "If the treads were repaired, it was at your client's instruction. To charge me with the vices of iron is to amuse the air." Holmes's smile did not move his mouth. "The air is easily amused. I prefer men." "Lestrade." The inspector came forward from the shadow with a relish he made no effort to conceal. Holmes, without removing his gaze from Sedgwick, spoke as a lecturer who puts his student's fingers upon a nerve. "You will note the chalk at the edge of Mr. Sedgwick's right instep, precisely where the riser would kiss a foot that turns inward. You will note the rosin bloom at the web of his right glove, where the grain of this rail took him through kid. You will hear, if I set my finger thus, the faint hum of the string that protests when a heel drags." He touched the filament. It answered like an insect's wing. Sedgwick's lip showed for the first time a tooth. "And if I walk upon a stair and touch a rail," he said levelly, "shall I be hanged?" "No," said Holmes. "You shall be hanged for other things, for writing to your clerk with a bell upon the wax in a hand that dots its I to the right and hooks its R, as a chancery man learns to do, for purchasing gut by proxy and asking whether carbolic will harden it, for rehearsing a fall in this very house and smoking paper in St. Bride's while you hid vellum where a printer would not look, for leaving a chip of scarlet wax beneath a landing and a fleck of the same upon a dead man's cuff, for knowing too well where the 13th step lies in your own theatre." Sedgwick's gaze slid once down the well and once up it, like a man measuring depth and height with a carpenter's mind. He made his choice in silence. With a sudden, violent economy, he thrust past Holmes for the study, his hand already reaching for the parcel on the desk. He meant, I think, to seize, to rend, to feed the grate with brown paper truth and walk out upon an emptier world. Holmes did not seize him. He took half a pace, let the man pass, and then touched the bell-pull. From the far door of the study, Lestrade's constable stepped in. From the near, Smethwick, with the steadiness of a man who has mended too many small catastrophes to respect large ones. Sedgwick checked, calculated again, and in that instant Holmes's hand, which had seemed to do nothing, did the one thing needful. He lifted the parcel's lid and showed the blank paper within. "You have chosen the wrong fire," he said softly. "The vellum is not here. It is upon my person, and a copy lies already in the hands of a man who sets type for the first and last time that evening the solicitor's control ruptured." He sprang, not at the desk, but at Holmes himself, low and panther-quick, the shoulder aimed to drive him backward into the well. It was a hideous echo of the physics Holmes had anatomized. I cried out. Lestrade swore. But Holmes had set his feet as a swordsman sets the line. Sedgwick struck, and met not air, but the iron of a man whose weight had already shifted. The solicitor reeled. His heel found the inner curve, and the string lifted to kiss leather. It sang. His hand went instinctively to the rail and found the rosin that holds. In that treacherous help lay his defeat. Lestrade was upon him in an instant. The cuffs clicked, and the breath went out of the house like a gust through a keyhole. There was no oratory in the capture. Sedgwick said nothing. He stared at the spiral, then at Holmes, and then at Sir Julius, who had come no further than the threshold, and stood gazing with the ruin of trust plain upon his aged face. Eliza had kept her promise to remain unseen. Only the faintest sense of her, Violet's thread will, seemed to hang upon the landing above like the memory of a note. Holmes took from his pocket the tin cylinder and set it upon the desk with a little metallic finality. He did not open it. He looked at Sedgwick as one looks at a diagram that has at last ceased to wriggle. "You will find, Inspector," he said quietly, "that within are the vellum strips of the bell ring, the names, the dates, the passages of paper that pretended to be goods. Mr. Quill will show you the envelopes sealed with a bell and the hand that wrote them. Miss Pargeter will swear to the purchases. The verger at St. Bride's will speak to who waited in the nave, and the stair, our poor abused spiral, will sing you its song if you put your ear to it." Sedgwick lifted his chin. "A case," he said, with a dry contempt that barely disguised fatigue. "You make a case, Mr. Holmes. That is your gift. Men like me make arrangements. That is ours." Holmes's eyes, very bright in the shaded lamplight, did not soften. "You made an arrangement with gravity, Mr. Sedgwick." It displeased me. Lestrade took his prisoner away with the efficiency of habit. Smethwick closed the door as if tidying an error. Sir Julius sat at last and put his hands upon the desk as upon a rail that would not betray him. Holmes stood very still, head bowed, as if listening to a last echo die somewhere up in the throat of the stair. "It remains," he said presently, turning to me with that sudden return to the ordinary which always astonishes me, "to bring our players together and to lay the score before them. Tomorrow, Watson, I shall ask you for a very neat account of Mr. Larch's injuries, with particular regard to the right palm. Tonight, I think, we have earned what Mrs. Hudson calls a respectable supper. And Miss Bellwether?" I asked. He glanced upward, where the silence of her room pressed against the landing like frost upon glass. "Miss Bellwether has been brave in the wrong direction," he said. "Tomorrow I shall ask her to be brave in the right one." He tapped the cylinder with a finger. "And then we shall ring down the curtain." The morning after the arrest, the fog had lifted, and London shone with a brittle clearness, every brick and pane as if scrubbed by an unseen hand. Lestrade, brisk with triumph, had already dispatched Sedgwick to the cells, and the newspapers hummed with the tale of the solicitor's spiral snare. Yet for Holmes the case had not quite closed. He carried himself with that quiet tension I knew well, the last tightening of a knot before he let it lie. We had summoned the principal figures, Sir Julius, his niece, Quill, and Torrigiani, to Baker Street, where the sitting-room became tribunal. The tin cylinder lay upon the table, the scarlet thread bound round its vellum contents like a seal of guilt. Lestrade, seated with his notebook, had the look of a man impatient for Holmes to speak the final chord. Holmes did not begin at once. He stood by the fire, fingers steepled, and allowed the silence to grow until even Torrigiani's nervous sighs stilled. Then he spoke, not with drama, but with that clarity which can strip a thing to its bone. "Gentlemen and Miss Bellwether, Mr. Larch's death was no misadventure. It was a rehearsed tragedy, designed to appear inevitable. The grease upon the rail, the catgut strung between steps, the wax chip, the cigarette smoke, the chalk upon the risers. These were not accidents in concert, but movements in a composition. At its centre stood Mr. Sedgwick, who sought to preserve his own skin and silence Sir Julius's antiquarian adviser before the latter uncovered the truth of a ledger with a false spine. That ledger held not only Venetian accounts but the names and workings of the Bell Ring, a fraternity of forgers and smugglers whose device was a bell in a circle. He touched the tin cylinder lightly. "Here lies, there." Confession stitched into vellum, hidden within a church wall, and recovered by one too clever to leave it in a client's desk. Sedgwick rehearsed Larch's fall in this very house, marking the 9th and 13th steps as his private stage. When the antiquarian grew suspicious and tested the rail, he walked into the trap and died instantly. The hyoid bone tells us as much. Sedgwick believed himself safe, but his own fastidious habits betrayed him. Chalk upon his boots, rosin upon his gloves, the lawyer's hand upon his letters, all left traces a schoolboy might overlook, but which a detective cannot. Sir Julius groaned softly, but Holmes lifted a hand. "You, sir, were more victim than accomplice." "Your youthful entanglement with the bell ring gave Sedgwick his lever, but you neither planned nor sanctioned this crime. Your guilt is silence, not conspiracy." Then Holmes's gaze turned to Eliza, whose pale composure trembled only at the edges. "You, Miss Bellwether, sought to protect your uncle by concealing what you guessed, by stitching, by hiding, by misleading, when honesty would have been crueler, but safer. You bought the thread, you carried the knife, and in so doing you gave Sedgwick the cover he required, but you did not kill. You are guilty only of loyalty carried past the line of wisdom. It is a punishment more severe than anything the law could decree." Her eyes filled, though no tear fell. "And Mr. Quill?" she asked, her voice no more than a thread. Holmes inclined his head toward the young clerk. Quill carried messages and obeyed notes sealed with bells, but he was not the bell-ringer. He sought to bury what might have ruined his master, and in his clumsy subterfuge he tangled himself deeper. It was he who placed the vellum at St. Bride's, believing he could guard it better there. His guilt is cowardice, and cowardice may yet be cured by daylight. Quill looked down, ashamed, but the relief upon his face was genuine. Torreggiani, for once, found no flourish. He merely crossed himself and muttered of saints. Holmes straightened, the firelight catching the hawk lines of his face. Thus the circle is closed. The solicitor, who thought himself above rope and rail, is now where rope is certain and rail is iron. The house that feared scandal is cleansed by confession. And the spiral, the symbol of deception in this case, will be remembered not as the stare of a scholar's death, but as the snare of a lawyer's folly. Lestrade snapped his notebook shut with satisfaction. Sir Julius murmured thanks with the broken gratitude of a man reprieved from hanging by proxy. Eliza rose, pale but unbowed, and with a low curtsy withdrew without another word. When the room had emptied, and the day was ours again, Holmes dropped into his chair, drew the violin across his knee, and touched the bow to the strings. A long, low note filled the room, neither joyful nor sorrowful, but something between. A line stretched, taut, like the case itself. "It is always the same, Watson," he said, lowering the instrument. "Men think they may command gravity, but gravity keeps its own counsel." They set threads and rails and stairs in their favour, yet in the end it is the smallest trace, a fleck of wax, a smudge of chalk that pulls them down. He smiled, faintly, almost weary. "And then Scotland Yard rings the bell and we go on to another tune." So ended the matter of the murder on the spiral steps. And though London soon found fresh scandals to occupy its gossip, whenever I pass a narrow, curling stair in some ancient house, I hear again that faint, sinister twang of catgut in the shadows, and I remember how Holmes turned even the treachery of a spiral into a straight line of truth.